You think you can waltz back into my life after what your family did to me? Her voice, sharp yet trembling, sliced through the glittering ballroom. Beneath dazzling chandeliers, a young millionaire stood frozen mid-speech, his eyes locked on a stunning black woman, a social worker radiant in a simple gown, standing out in a sea of opulence. Beside her, three small boys in tiny tuxedos gazed curiously, their features eerily mirroring his. She wasn't here for him, but fate had other plans. Once she endured cruel whispers, venomous insults from his kin, and a betrayal that shattered her heart, forcing her to vanish with a secret. Will this chance reunion heal old wounds or deepen them? Friends, hit that subscribe button to catch our latest stories and share where you're tuning in from. Can love triumph over prejudice? Stay with us to uncover their truth. The grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their crystal facets scattering light across polished marble floors. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in cascading gowns swirled through the space, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. The Charity Gala, an annual pinnacle of high society, thrummed with wealth and purpose. At the center of it all stood Theo Kensington, a millionaire in his early 30s, his sharp jaw and piercing gray-blue eyes commanding the room. His dark hair gleamed under the lights as he stepped to the podium, his voice steady and resonant, delivering a speech on family and responsibility to an audience of hundreds. Donors leaned forward, captivated by his charisma, unaware that his carefully curated world was about to fracture. "Ladies and gentlemen," Theo began, his tone warm yet authoritative. "Tonight, we gather not just for charity, but to honor the bonds that define us, our families, our duties." His words flowed effortlessly, honed by years of boardroom finesse. But as he scanned the crowd, his gaze snagged on a figure near the entrance, and his heart lurched. There, framed by the golden glow of a candelabra, stood Simone Jamerson, his ex-wife. She was a vision in a deep sapphire gown, simple yet elegant, her ebony skin radiant against the fabric. Beside her, clinging to her skirt, were three small boys in miniature tuxedos, no older than 4. Their chestnut curls and striking gray-blue eyes, eerily identical to Theo's, stared back at him. The microphone amplified his sudden falter, a half-formed word dissolving into silence. The room stirred, sensing the shift. Simone hadn't come for Theo. A friend at the charity had gifted her the tickets, urging her to bring her sons for a glimpse into a world she rarely touched. As a social worker, Simone's life revolved around helping others, not mingling with the elite. Her presence in this opulent setting felt like a quiet rebellion, her modest grace a stark contrast to the glittering excess. She adjusted a boy's bow tie, her movements tender, oblivious to the storm brewing across the room. But then her eyes met Theo's, and her serene expression cracked. Recognition flashed, followed by a flicker of panic. She tightened her grip on her sons, her instincts screaming to flee. Theo's speech unraveled. As I was saying," he stammered, his usual composure slipping. The triplets' faces, those miniature reflections of his own, seared into his mind. His chest tightened, a rush of disbelief and longing warring within him. Were they his? The math aligned too perfectly. 5 years since their divorce, these boys no older than 4. The room's chatter faded to a hum as his world narrowed to Simone and the children. Vanessa, his statuesque blonde date, leaned close, her voice sharp with irritation. "Theo, what's wrong? You're embarrassing yourself." Her perfectly manicured hand grazed his arm, but he barely registered it. Across the ballroom, a silver-haired woman in a sequined gown whispered to her companion, her tone dripping with judgment. "Who brings children to a gala like this? And in such a simple dress?" The words, though hushed, carried the sting of prejudice, a subtle jab at Simone's presence in a space where she was deemed out of place. Simone didn't hear, but she felt the weight of curious stares, the unspoken assumptions about her and her sons. She straightened, her chin lifting defiantly, and began guiding the boys toward the exit, her steps quick but graceful. Theo's heart pounded. He couldn't let her slip away again. Not with those boys, not with the questions burning in his chest. "Excuse me," he muttered into the microphone. abandoning the podium mid-sentence. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he wove through clusters of bewildered guests, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. Vanessa's voice shrilled behind him. "Theo, where are you going?" She tossed her curls, her emerald gown catching the light, but he didn't turn back. His focus was singular. Simone. She reached the grand entrance, ushering the boys toward the coat check. The triplets, oblivious to the tension, chattered about the shiny lights and fancy drinks. Simone's hands trembled as she gathered their jackets, her mind racing. She hadn't expected to see Theo, hadn't prepared for the flood of memories. His smile on their wedding day, the pain of their final fight. She glanced back, hoping he hadn't followed, but there he was, breathless, his eyes wide with a mix of desperation and awe. "Simone, wait," Theo said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. She froze, one boy clutching her hand, another tugging her dress. Slowly she turned, her deep brown eyes meeting his. For a moment time seemed to pause, the gala's noise fading into the background. The air between them crackled with unspoken history, love, betrayal, and years of silence. Simone's posture stiffened, her protective instincts flaring. "What do you want, Theo?" she asked, her tone cool but quivering at the edges. I just need to talk," he said, his gaze dropping to the boys. Up close, their resemblance was undeniable. The curve of their noses, the tilt of their brows, mirrors of his own childhood photos. His throat tightened. "Please, just a moment." He gestured toward a nearby hallway leading to a VIP lounge, a quieter space away from prying eyes. Simone hesitated, glancing at her sons. The boys looked up at her, curious but unafraid, their innocence a shield against the storm brewing between the adults. She bit her lip, weighing her options. Every fiber of her screamed to leave, to protect her children from the man who'd once let her down. But something in Theo's eyes, raw, unguarded, made her pause. "5 minutes," she said finally, her voice firm. "For their sake, not yours." Theo exhaled, relief mingling with dread. He signaled a staff member, a young woman in a crisp uniform, and slipped her a generous tip. "Please escort them to the VIP lounge," he said, his charm reflexive despite his turmoil. "And bring some juice for the kids." The staffer nodded, guiding Simone and the boys down a plush-carpeted hall. Vanessa, trailing behind, caught up, her heels clicking sharply. "Theo, what is this?" she demanded, eyeing Simone with thinly veiled disdain. "Who are these people?" "Not now, Vanessa," Theo said, his voice low and final. He gently steered her aside. "I'll explain later. Please, go back to the gala." Vanessa's eyes flashed with hurt and indignation, but she turned on her heel, her gown swishing as she stormed off. Theo barely noticed, his focus on the lounge door ahead. Inside, the VIP room was an oasis of calm, its soft lighting and leather sofas a stark contrast to the ballroom's dazzle. Simone sat on a couch, one boy perched on her lap, the others flanking her. The triplets fidgeted, their tiny tuxedos slightly askew, but their eyes sparkled with curiosity. Theo stood a few feet away, his hands clasped to steady himself. "Simone," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Are they—" He couldn't finish, his eyes pleading for the truth. Simone's jaw tightened. She looked down at her sons, her hands resting protectively on their shoulders. "They're my children," she said, emphasizing "my" with a quiet intensity. The words hung heavy, answering his question without confirming it outright. Theo's heart sank and soared at once. He saw it in their faces, the undeniable truth. These were his sons, hidden from him for years. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Simone, why didn't you tell me?" His eyes glistened, a mix of wonder and pain. Simone's gaze hardened, but a flicker of vulnerability betrayed her. "You made your choice 5 years ago, Theo," she said, her voice low to shield the boys. "When your mother called me a disgrace, when she said I'd ruin your family's name, you didn't stand up for me. You let me walk away." Theo flinched, the memory cutting deep. He remembered that night, a different gala, his mother's cruel words, his own cowardice. He'd been torn, too weak to defy his family's expectations. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice barely audible. I was a fool, and I've regretted it every day since. Simone's eyes softened, but only slightly. She glanced at the boys who were now playing with the juice boxes the staffer had brought. "We need to go," she said, standing. "It's late." Theo stepped forward, desperate. "Please, let me get you home safely. We can talk more another time. Just don't disappear again." She studied him, conflict raging in her expression. Finally, she nodded curtly. "Fine. You can drive us, but this changes nothing." Theo nodded, relief washing over him. As they gathered the boys' jackets, he stole one last glance at the triplets, his heart aching with a love he hadn't yet earned. The gala's lights faded behind them as they stepped into the night, an uncertain future waiting. The VIP lounge of the Regency Hotel was a sanctuary of muted elegance, its soft amber lighting casting warm shadows across plush leather sofas and mahogany tables. The distant hum of the Gala's orchestra barely penetrated the thick walls, leaving an almost sacred quiet. Simone Jamerson sat rigidly on a sofa, her sapphire gown pooling around her like a protective shield. Her sons, Isaiah, Micah, and Xavier, huddled close, their tiny tuxedos slightly rumpled from the evening's excitement. Isaiah clutched her hand, his wide gray-blue eyes darting between his mother and the stranger before them. Micah fidgeted, kicking his polished shoes against the sofa's edge, while Xavier, the quietest, studied the man with a solemn curiosity. Theo Kensington stood a careful distance away, his tailored suit now slightly askew, his hands clasped to steady the tremor in them. The air crackled with unspoken history, heavy with the weight of 5 years apart. Simone's gaze was guarded, her jaw set as she adjusted Xavier's bow tie, a reflexive gesture to anchor herself. Theo's presence, so close after years of absence, churned memories she'd buried deep. Nights of whispered promises, mornings tangled in laughter, and the shattering moment when it all fell apart. She'd agreed to this fleeting conversation, but every instinct screamed to protect her boys from the man who'd once failed her. Theo's eyes, those same gray-blue mirrors of her son's, pleaded for a chance to speak. He took a tentative step forward, his voice low and earnest. "Simone, I need to know, are they mine?" The question hung like a fragile thread, taut with hope and dread. Simone's breath caught, her fingers tightening around Isaiah's small hand. She glanced at her sons, their innocent faces oblivious to the storm brewing in her heart. "They're my children," she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet defiance, emphasizing "my" as if to draw a line Theo couldn't cross. The words were a shield, deflecting his question without denying the truth. Theo's face crumpled, a mix of anguish and awe. He saw it in the boy's features, the chestnut curls, the sharp noses, the eyes that echoed his own childhood portraits. There was no doubt, no need for confirmation. These were his sons, a revelation that both anchored and unmoored him. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a nervous habit Simone remembered from their shared past. "Why didn't you tell me, Simone? Why keep this from me?" His tone wasn't accusatory but raw, as if the weight of missing years pressed against his chest. Simone's eyes flashed, a spark of old pain igniting. She leaned forward slightly, mindful of the boy's presence, her voice low but cutting. "You made your choice, Theo. 5 years ago, when your mother cornered me at that gala, when she called me a disgrace to your family's name, you didn't defend me. You stood there silent while she told me I'd ruin you." Theo flinched, the memory slicing through him like a blade. He saw it now, vivid and cruel. Another gala, years earlier, at his parents' sprawling estate. Simone had worn an ivory dress, elegant but not ostentatious, a quiet defiance against the couture-clad elite. His mother, Eleanor Kensington, had pulled her aside near the powder room, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll never belong here," she'd hissed. "Any child of yours would be a stain on our legacy. If you love Theo, you'll leave before you drag him down with you." Simone had stumbled away, humiliated, her heart breaking as she sought Theo's comfort. But when she'd told him, tears streaming, he'd hesitated, torn between his love for her and the weight of his family's expectations. His silence had been a betrayal, louder than any words. "I was wrong," Theo said now. his voice barely above a whisper. He sank into an armchair across from her, his elbows on his knees, his face etched with regret. I was a coward, Simone. I let my mother's words poison me. Let my fear of losing their approval blind me. I've regretted it every day since you left. His eyes glistened, but he held her gaze, willing her to see his sincerity. If I'd known you were pregnant, I'd have fought for you. For them. He glanced at the boys, his heart twisting at their innocence. Simone's expression wavered, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her resolve. She remembered that night, the cold marble of the estate's hallway, the sting of Eleanor's words and Theo's inaction. She left in tears, her world collapsing, unaware of the three lives growing inside her. When she discovered her pregnancy weeks later, fear and pride had kept her silent. She'd feared Theo's rejection, his family's scorn, or worse, their attempt to claim her children. You let me walk away, she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. Your mother said any child of ours would be a stain. I couldn't risk them facing that hate. I had to protect them. Theo's breath hitched, his hands clenching. She said that? He asked, horror dawning. He'd known his mother disapproved, but the depth of her cruelty stunned him. Simone, I didn't know. I was blind, but I swear, I'd have stood by you if I'd known. His voice cracked, raw with guilt. He leaned forward, desperate to bridge the chasm between them. I failed you, and I can't undo that. But I'm here now, begging for a chance to understand. Simone's eyes glistened, but she refused to let tears fall. She glanced at her sons, who were now sipping juice boxes brought by the staffer, their small hands sticky but content. Micah giggled, trying to balance his juice box on his knee, while Xavier watched Theo with that same solemn curiosity. Isaiah, still clinging to her, seemed to sense the tension, his thumb hovering near his mouth. Simone's heart ached. She'd built a world for her boys, a fortress of love against the prejudice she'd faced. Letting Theo in risked crumbling that safety. The lounge's quiet was punctured by a faint whisper from outside the door, a guest's voice drifting through. Those kids don't belong here. Who is she anyway? The words, though muffled, carried the familiar sting of judgment, a reminder of the world Simone navigated daily. She stiffened, her protective instincts flaring, but she didn't acknowledge the comment. Instead, she met Theo's gaze, her voice steady but edged with pain. Your world never accepted me, Theo. Not your family, not your friends. I was the outsider, the one who didn't fit. I couldn't let my children grow up under that shadow. Theo's face crumpled, shame washing over him. He wanted to argue, to promise he'd shield them, but the truth of her words silenced him. He'd failed to protect her once, and that failure had cost them both. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said softly, but please don't shut me out. Not now, not when I've just found them. His eyes darted to the boys, a desperate hope flickering. I want to know them, Simone. I want to be something to them. Simone studied him, conflict raging in her chest. His remorse seemed genuine, his pain palpable, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered long ago. She glanced at her sons, their innocence a reminder of what mattered most. We need to go, she said finally, standing and smoothing her gown. It's past their bedtime. The boys looked up, sensing the shift, and began gathering their things, their small voices murmuring about the fancy room. Theo rose, his heart sinking. Let me drive you home, he said, his tone pleading, just to make sure you're safe. We can talk more later, whenever you're ready. He held his breath, fearing she'd refuse. Simone hesitated, her eyes searching his face. The boys tugged at her hands, oblivious to the stakes. Finally, she nodded, her voice firm. You can drive us, but this doesn't mean anything's changed, Theo. He nodded, relief flooding him. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick. As they moved toward the door, the staffer reappeared, offering a warm smile and handing Simone the boys' jackets. Theo stole a glance at the triplets, their faces a haunting echo of his own. He followed them out, the weight of their shared past pressing against him, but a flicker of hope burned within. The Gala's lights faded behind them, leaving only the truth, raw, painful, and undeniable, hanging in the air. The late afternoon sun bathed the suburban park in a golden glow, its rays filtering through sprawling oak trees. Children's laughter echoed across the grassy expanse, mingling with the creak of swings and the soft thud of a soccer ball. Simone Jamerson stood near a wooden bench, her arms crossed, watching her triplets, Isaiah, Micah, and Xavier, chase a butterfly through the clover. Her deep brown eyes, usually so vigilant, softened at their joy. As a social worker, her days were filled with paperwork and heartbreak, but this park, this moment, was her sanctuary. Her modest home, a cozy two-bedroom nestled on a tree-lined street, was just a short walk away, its walls adorned with crayon drawings and love. Yet today, an unfamiliar presence stirred her carefully built world. Theo Kensington, standing awkwardly by the slide, his tailored jacket replaced by a simple sweater, his gaze fixed on the boys. Theo had been true to his word since the gala, appearing at Simone's doorstep with cautious regularity. He came not as the millionaire who'd once faltered, but as Mr. Theo, a tentative visitor seeking a place in the lives of three boys who didn't yet know he was their father. Simone had permitted these visits, her heart torn between guarding her sons and the flicker of hope in Theo's earnest eyes. Today he knelt near the sandbox, helping Micah pile sand into a lopsided castle. "Higher, Mr. Theo," Micah giggled, his chestnut curls bouncing. Theo's laugh, warm and unguarded, carried across the park, and Simone felt a pang, part nostalgia, part unease. The park was alive with families, but not all eyes were kind. A woman pushing a stroller nearby leaned toward her friend, her voice low but sharp. "Is he their nanny or something? Doesn't quite fit, does he?" The words, laced with assumption, stung like a familiar bruise. Simone's jaw tightened, her hand brushing Isaiah's shoulder as he ran to her, breathless from chasing Xavier. She'd faced such whispers before, judgments on her skin, her single motherhood, her place in a world that often deemed her less than, but she held her head high, her love for her boys a shield against the world's prejudice. Micah's shout broke her thoughts. "Mama, look!" He pointed to the slide where he'd clambered to the top, only to slip and tumble into the mulch. Before Simone could move, Theo was there, his reflexes swift as he scooped Micah up, brushing dirt from his knees. "You okay, buddy?" Theo asked, his voice gentle but laced with worry. Micah nodded, his gray-blue eyes. Theo's eyes, bright with trust. Simone's breath caught. The sight of Theo cradling her son, his concern so instinctive, stirred something she wasn't ready to name. She approached, her voice steady. "He's fine, Theo. He's tougher than he looks." Theo set Micah down, who scampered off to join his brothers. He straightened, meeting Simone's gaze. "I didn't mean to overstep," he said softly, his hands shoved into his pockets. I couldn't help it." Simone nodded, her expression unreadable. She wanted to trust this new Theo, the one who showed up with coloring books and patience. But the memory of his past silence lingered like a shadow. Later at Simone's home, the evening unfolded with the quiet chaos of dinner. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, a simple meal Simone had prepared with the boys' help. Isaiah had insisted on setting the table, his small hands carefully placing forks, while Xavier stirred the gravy with intense focus. Micah, ever the chatterbox, recounted his sandbox adventure to Theo, who sat at the table, an invited guest but not yet family. The house was warm, its walls lined with photos of the boys' milestones, first steps, birthday cakes, gap-toothed grins. Theo's eyes lingered on each frame, a silent ache for the years he'd missed. As Simone served the food, Xavier's quiet voice broke the hum of conversation. "Mr. Theo, why do you look like us?" he asked, his fork paused midair, his gray-blue eyes studying Theo with unnerving clarity. The room stilled. Isaiah looked up, curious, while Micah tilted his head, waiting. Simone froze, her hand gripping the serving spoon. Theo's throat tightened, his gaze darting to Simone for guidance. She gave a slight shake of her head, a silent plea to tread carefully. He swallowed, forcing a gentle smile. "Well, Xavier, sometimes people share the same colors, eyes, hair. It's like a little gift from the world, don't you think?" Xavier frowned, not entirely satisfied, but Micah chimed in. "Like how we all have curly hair." The tension eased and Simone exhaled, grateful for the distraction. But the question lingered in her mind, a reminder of the truth she wasn't ready to unveil. She'd told the boys their father lived far away, a vague lie to protect their hearts. Now with Theo here, that lie felt heavier, more fragile. After dinner, the boys dragged Theo to the living room, insisting he read their favorite bedtime story. Simone watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, as Theo sat cross-legged on the rug, his deep voice bringing the brave little turtle to life. Isaiah, usually shy, inched closer, resting his head against Theo's arm. Micah sprawled across the floor, mimicking turtle sounds, while Xavier listened intently, his solemn eyes never leaving Theo. Simone's heart twisted. Theo was slipping into their lives, his warmth disarming her defenses. But trust was a bridge she hadn't yet crossed. As the story ended, Isaiah yawned, his thumb creeping toward his mouth. "Mr. Theo, will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Theo's eyes softened, and he glanced at Simone, seeking permission. "If your mom says it's okay," he replied, his tone careful. Simone managed a tight smile. "We'll see, Isaiah. It's bedtime now." She ushered the boys to their room, their protests fading into yawns. Alone in the kitchen, Simone began washing dishes, the clink of plates grounding her. Theo lingered, drying a plate with a dish towel, his presence both familiar and foreign. "They're amazing, Simone," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done so much for them. I wish I'd been here." Simone paused, her hands submerged in soapy water. "I did what I had to," she said, her tone clipped but not unkind. "They're my world, Theo. I couldn't let anyone hurt them. Not your family, not anyone." Theo nodded, his jaw tight. He remembered his mother's cruel words, the prejudice that had driven Simone away. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, his voice low. "I want to be here, for them, for you, if you'll let me." Simone dried her hands, turning to face him. Her eyes searched his, torn between hope and fear. "It's not that simple," she said. "You don't just walk back in and become their dad. They don't know you, Theo, and I don't know if I can trust you." He took a step closer, then stopped, respecting her space. "I know," he said. "I'll prove it, Simone, however long it takes." His sincerity was palpable, but Simone's heart remained guarded. She'd built this life alone, against whispers and judgments, like the one she'd overheard at the park today. Another mother had watched Theo with the boys, muttering, "He's out of place with them, isn't he? Probably just a charity case." The words had cut, a reminder of the world's quick assumptions about her family. "I need time," Simone said finally, her voice softening. "For their sake, not mine." Theo nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'll take whatever you give me," he said. "Can I come back tomorrow? Just to see them?" Simone hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we go slow, Theo. They come first." He smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Always," he promised. As Theo left, the house settled into quiet, the boys' soft snores drifting from their room. Simone stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street. The man she'd once loved was trying, but the scars of his betrayal lingered. Yet seeing him with her sons, the way he'd knelt to comfort Micah, the patience in his voice as he read, stirred something she couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, she wondered if her fortress could hold room for one more. The morning air hung heavy with the scent of rain as Simone Jamerson stood at her kitchen window, her reflection blurred in the glass. Her modest suburban home, usually a haven of warmth, felt claustrophobic today. The triplets, Isaiah, Micah, and Xavier, giggled in the living room, stacking blocks into a teetering tower, their innocence untouched by the storm brewing beyond these walls. Simone's phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter, notifications piling up from news alerts and messages. Headlines screamed across her screen, "Millionaire's secret children revealed," and "Kensington's hidden heirs at Gala shocker." Each word was a dagger, twisting her carefully guarded life into a public spectacle. She'd built a fortress for her sons, shielding them from the world's judgments. But now that fortress was crumbling under the weight of tabloid frenzy. It started with Vanessa, Theo's scorned date from the gala. Furious at being dismissed that night, she'd leaked photos to the press, Snaps of Simone and the boys, their uncanny resemblance to Theo undeniable. By morning, gossip rags had spun a tale of scandal, dubbing the triplets Kensington's lost heirs. Simone's heart sank as she scrolled through the vitriol online, comments questioning her motives, labeling her a gold digger who'd trapped a millionaire. One anonymous post cut deeper than the rest. Those kids don't belong in his world. She's just after his money. The words echoed the prejudice she'd faced years ago, a reminder that her place in Theo's elite circles was still contested. Theo, unaware of the escalating chaos, arrived at Simone's doorstep with a bag of donuts, his smile tentative but warm. He'd been a steady presence these past weeks, his visits a delicate dance of earning trust. "Thought the boys might like a treat," he said, holding up the bag. But Simone's expression stopped him cold. Her eyes, usually warm, were stormy with fear. "Have you seen this?" she asked, thrusting her phone toward him. Theo's face paled as he read the headlines, his jaw tightening. "Vanessa," he muttered, anger flashing. "I'll handle this, Simone. I promise." But the storm grew fiercer. By noon, a sleek black car pulled up outside Simone's home, its tinted windows gleaming ominously. A man in a crisp suit emerged, his polished shoes out of place on her cracked driveway. He introduced himself as Mr. Hargrove, attorney for the Kensington family. Simone ushered the boys to their room, her voice calm but firm, before facing him in her small living room. Theo, who'd stayed at her insistence, stood beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. Hargrove's smile was practiced, his tone dripping with condescension. "Ms. Jamerson, the Kensingtons are prepared to offer a substantial sum to secure the boys' future as legitimate heirs," he said, sliding a contract across the coffee table. "Of course, this would require you to relinquish custody. A single mother like you must find it challenging to raise children of such pedigree." Simone's breath caught, her hands clenching. The implication was clear. She was unfit, her background and skin color a barrier to the Kensington legacy. Theo's eyes blazed, but before he could speak, Simone leaned forward, her voice like steel. "My sons are not bargaining chips," she said. "They're not your heirs to claim. They're mine, and they're staying with me." Hargrove's smile faltered, but he pressed on, addressing Theo. "Mr. Kensington, surely you see the benefits. Your family's reputation, your legacy, it's at stake." Theo's hand shot up, silencing him. "My family's right here," he said, his voice low and fierce, gesturing to Simone and the closed door where the boys played. "Tell my parents their money means nothing to me." Hargrove left, his contract untouched, but the encounter left Simone shaken. She paced the kitchen, her mind racing. The media frenzy, the Kensingtons' audacity. It was too much. She'd fought for years to give her boys a life free from the prejudice that had scarred her, but now it was closing in. "I can't do this, Theo," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't let them grow up under this scrutiny, judged for who I am or who you are. I'm taking them away from here." Theo's face fell, panic flickering in his gray-blue eyes. "Simone, please, let me fix this. Don't leave." But Simone's resolve hardened. She'd survived alone before, and she could do it again. That evening, she packed a single suitcase, her hands trembling as she folded the boys' clothes. Isaiah sensed her tension, clinging to her leg. "Mama, where are we going?" he asked, his voice small. Simone knelt, forcing a smile. "Just a little trip, sweetheart," she said, brushing a curl from his forehead. Micah and Xavier joined them, their questions piling up, but Simone kept her answers vague, her heart aching at the thought of uprooting their lives. Theo learned of her plan through a mutual friend, a co-worker from Simone's social work office who'd seen her buying train tickets. Desperate, he raced to the station, his heart pounding as he wove through the evening crowd. The platform was alive with the hum of departure, commuters bustling under flickering lights. Simone stood near a bench, her sons clustered around her, their small backpacks bouncing as they chattered about the big train. She wore a simple coat, her face etched with exhaustion and resolve. Theo spotted them just as the train's whistle blew, his breath ragged from running. "Simone!" he called, his voice cutting through the din. She turned, startled, her eyes widening as he approached, clutching a small wooden toy car in his hand. It was weathered, its red paint chipped, a relic from his childhood, one he'd once promised to give his own son. "Please, wait," he gasped, stopping a few feet away. The boys looked up, curious, as Theo held out the car, his voice trembling. "I kept this for years, thinking one day I'd give it to my kid. I didn't know then it'd be for them. For Isaiah, Micah, Xavier." His eyes locked on hers, raw with sincerity. "I'm not the man I was, Simone. I'll fight my family, the media, the whole damn world to protect you and our boys. Please don't go." Simone's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. The toy car, so small yet heavy with meaning, was a testament to the Theo she'd once loved, the one who dreamed of a family, not the one who'd let her walk away. She glanced at her sons, their innocent faces watching the exchange. Micah tilted his head, whispering, "Is Mr. Theo coming with us?" The question broke her, a reminder of the bond they'd begun to form. She'd seen Theo's care, the way he'd knelt in the park, the patience in his bedtime stories. But trust was a fragile thing, and the world's cruelty loomed large. The station's loudspeaker crackled, announcing the train's imminent departure. Simone's hand tightened around Isaiah's, her resolve wavering. She'd faced prejudice before, whispers at the park, Hargrove's veiled insults. But this was different. Theo wasn't just offering apologies. He was standing against his own blood, choosing her and their sons over a legacy of wealth and power. "Why now, Theo?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why should I believe you won't falter again?" Theo stepped closer, his eyes glistening. "Because I've lost you once, and it nearly destroyed me. I won't lose you again, or them. I'll shield you from my family, from the press. I'll prove I'm worthy of you all." He held out the toy car, a silent vow. Simone's gaze dropped to it, her heart racing. The platform grew quiet, the crowd thinning as the train's doors opened. She looked at her boys, then back at Theo, his face a map of hope and fear. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "We'll stay. But this is for them, Theo. We do this on my terms." Relief flooded his face, and he nodded, his voice thick. "Your terms? Always." The boys, sensing the shift, tugged at Simone's coat, their questions bubbling up. She knelt, pulling them close, her eyes meeting Theo's over their heads. The train pulled away, leaving them on the platform, a fragile new beginning, taking root amidst the chaos. The autumn sun dipped low, painting the suburban park in hues of amber and crimson. Leaves crunched underfoot as families gathered, their laughter weaving through the air. Simone Jamerson stood beneath a towering oak, her arms loosely folded, watching her triplets, Isaiah, Micah, and Xavier, dart through the grass, their giggles rising like music. Her cozy home, just down the street, hummed with the warmth of a life she'd built against all odds. Yet today her heart felt lighter, buoyed by a presence that had become as familiar as the boys' smiles. Theo Kensington, no longer just Mr. Theo, knelt nearby, tossing a foam football to Micah, his grin wide and unguarded. The past weeks had transformed him from a tentative visitor into a constant in their lives, his commitment a quiet promise kept with every visit. Theo had woven himself into the fabric of their days, arriving with storybooks or snacks, his tailored suits traded for jeans and sweaters. Simone watched him now, her deep brown eyes softening as Isaiah shyly handed Theo a leaf, a small offering of trust. The boys had grown attached, their chatter now peppered with Mr. Theo this and Mr. Theo that. But the truth simmered beneath the surface, unspoken yet heavy. Simone had guarded it, unsure when or if she could let it spill. The media storm had quieted thanks to Theo's firm handling of Vanessa's leaks, but the Kensington family's shadow still loomed, a final test of Theo's resolve. Inside her home that evening, the kitchen glowed with the scent of baked apples and cinnamon. The boys sat cross-legged on the living room rug, their tiny hands clutching crayons as they colored a shared picture of a rocket ship. Theo sat with them, his tie loosened, offering exaggerated praise for Xavier's bold red lines. Simone leaned against the doorway, her heart swelling at the scene. Then, as if sensing the moment's weight, Micah looked up, his gray-blue eyes so like Theo's, bright with curiosity. Mama, is Mr. Theo our daddy? He asked, his voice clear and unfiltered. The room stilled. Isaiah's crayon paused, and Xavier's solemn gaze fixed on Simone, waiting. Simone's breath caught, her hands gripping the doorframe. She dreaded this question, yet it felt inevitable. Theo froze, his eyes darting to her, a mix of hope and fear in his expression. She knelt beside the boys, her voice gentle but steady. Yes, sweethearts, she said, her throat tight. Theo is your daddy. He loves you very much. And he's here now because he wants to be with us. The words, so long held back, felt like a release. Isaiah's eyes widened, a grin spreading, while Micah bounced excitedly. Xavier, ever thoughtful, tilted his head, processing. Before Simone could say more, the boys scrambled to their feet, rushing to Theo. Daddy! They squealed, tackling him in a tangle of small arms and laughter. Theo's breath hitched, tears spilling as he hugged them tightly, his voice thick. Hey, my boys, he whispered, kissing their curls. Isaiah clung to his neck. Micah tugged his sleeve, and Xavier patted his cheek, their joy a balm to years of absence. Simone watched, tears brimming, her heart torn between relief and the weight of what this meant. She'd opened a door she couldn't close, trusting Theo to step through. Theo looked at her over the boys' heads, his eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, Simone, he mouthed, his voice lost in the chaos. She nodded, a small smile breaking through. The moment felt sacred, a family knitting itself together, but the world outside hadn't softened. As the boys returned to their coloring, chattering about Daddy, Simone's phone buzzed. A letter delivered earlier lay unopened on the counter, a heavy envelope with the Kensington family crest. She'd ignored it, but its presence gnawed at her. Theo noticed her glance and stood, his expression shifting to resolve. Let's see it, he said, his voice low. Simone hesitated, then handed him the letter. He tore it open, his jaw tightening as he read. It was from his mother, Eleanor, a final attempt to control him. The words were cloaked in civility, but dripped with disdain. Your involvement with that woman and her mixed children will never be accepted in our circles. If you persist, your inheritance is forfeit. The phrase mixed children stung, a reminder of the prejudice that had once driven Simone away. Theo's hands shook, anger flaring in his gray-blue eyes. She doesn't get to dictate our family, he said, his voice fierce. He turned to Simone, crumpling the letter. I'm done with them, Simone. They don't control me anymore. Not my money, not my life. He stepped closer, his voice softening. You and the boys are my family. Nothing else matters. Simone's breath caught, the weight of his words sinking in. She'd seen his efforts, the park visits, the bedtime stories. But this was different. He was severing ties, choosing them over a legacy of wealth and power. Before she could respond, a knock at the door startled them. Simone opened it to find a courier delivering a second letter from Theo's father. It offered a trust fund for the boys, but with a condition. They'd be sent to elite boarding schools far from Simone's influence. The implication was clear. Her motherhood, her identity, was a liability. Simone's hands trembled as she handed the letter to Theo, her voice steady despite her anger. They think they can buy my sons and erase me, she said. They're wrong. Theo's face hardened. He stepped outside, calling his father's office on speakerphone, his voice unwavering. You and Mother need to understand something, he said, his tone like steel. Isaiah, Micah, and Xavier are my children, and Simone is their mother. If you can't respect that, you're not welcome in our lives. No trust fund, no threats. We'll change that. He hung up, his chest heaving, and turned to Simone. I mean it. They're out. Simone's eyes glistened, her last reservations melting. She'd braced for betrayal, for Theo to falter under his family's pressure. But here he was, standing firm. You really mean that, she said, her voice soft with wonder. Theo nodded, stepping closer. I've never been sure of anything, he said. You and the boys are my home. On impulse, Simone reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The touch was electric, a quiet promise of unity. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for the first time in years she felt unburdened. The boys, sensing the shift, ran to them, tugging at their legs. Daddy, play with us, Micah demanded, waving a crayon. Theo laughed, scooping him up, while Isaiah and Xavier piled on, their laughter filling the room. Simone joined them, her smile radiant as she tickled Xavier's side. The house, once a fortress for her alone, now felt like a shared haven. They moved to the park later, the boys racing ahead to climb the oak tree. Simone and Theo walked hand in hand, their steps synchronized, a public show of their bond that spoke louder than words. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the grass, Simone looked at Theo, her heart full. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" she asked, her voice a mix of hope and certainty. Theo squeezed her hand, his eyes warm. "We are," he said, "and I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of it." The boys called to them, waving from the tree, their faces alight with joy. Simone and Theo joined them, the family whole under the fading light, their love a shield against the world's lingering shadows. Friends, thank you for joining Theo and Simone on their journey from heartbreak to healing and under the Gala lights. Their story reminds us that love and family can triumph over pride, prejudice, and even the harshest storms. What would you do in Simone's shoes? Could you forgive Theo's past and trust again? Or as Theo, how far would you go to rebuild a broken bond? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone, and your insights inspire our next tales. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to catch our latest stories. Let us know where you're tuning in from, your city, your corner of the world. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of love. We can't wait to share another heartfelt story with you soon.